A warm night, a hot morning, and a blazing noon. The sea was a sheet of burning tinsel and glass. Amy came walking in the locked-up carnival alleys, out over the warm sea, keeping in the shade, half a dozen sun-bleached magazines under her arm. She opened a flaking door and called into hot darkness, "Ralph!" She picked her way through the black hall behind the mirrors, her heels tacking the wooden floor. "Ralph!" Someone stirred sluggishly on the canvas cot. "Amy!" He sat up and screwed a dim light bulb into the dressing table socket. He squinted at her, half blinded. "Hey, you look like the cat swallowed a canary. Ralph, I came about the midget." "Dwarf, Amy, honey, dwarf. A midget is in the cells, born that way. A dwarf is in the glands. Ralph, I found out the most wonderful thing about him." "Honest to God," he said to his hands, holding them out as witness to his disbelief. "This woman! Who in hell gives 2 cents if some ugly little—" "Ralph!" She held out the magazines, her eyes shining. "He's a writer. Think of that." "It's a pretty hot day for thinking." He lay back and examined her, smiling faintly. "I just happened to pass the Ganges Arms and saw Mr. Greeley, the manager. He says the typewriter runs all night in Mr. Big's room." "Is that his name?" Ralph began to roar with laughter. "Writes just enough pulp detective stories to live. I found one of his stories in the second-hand magazine place. And Ralph, guess what? I'm tired, Amy. This little guy's got a soul as big as all outdoors. He's got everything in his head. Why ain't he writing for the big magazines then, I ask you? Because maybe he's afraid. Maybe he doesn't know he can do it. That happens. People don't believe in themselves. But if he only tried, I bet he could sell stories anywhere in the world. Why ain't he rich, I wonder? Maybe because ideas come slow. Because he's down in the dumps. Who wouldn't be so small that way? I bet it's hard to think of anything except being so small and living in a one-room cheap apartment." "Hell," snorted Ralph, "you talk like Florence Nightingale's grandma." She held up the magazine. "I'll read you part of his crime story. It's got all the guns and tough people, but it's told by a dwarf. I bet the editors never guessed the author knew what he was writing about." "Oh, please don't sit there like that, Ralph. Listen." And she began to read aloud. "I am a dwarf and I am a murderer. The 2 things cannot be separated. The one is the cause of the other. The man I murdered used to stop me in the street when I was 21, pick me up in his arms, kiss my brow, croon wildly at me, sing rock-a-bye baby, haul me into the meat markets, toss me on the scales, and cry, 'Watch it, don't weigh your thumb there, butcher.' Do you see how our lives move toward murder? This fool, this persecutor of my flesh and soul. As for my childhood, my parents were small people, not quite dwarves, not quite. My father's inheritance kept us in a doll's house. An amazing thing, like a white-scrolled wedding cake, little rooms, little chairs, miniature paintings, cameos, ambers with insects caught inside, everything, tiny, tiny, tiny. The world of giants far away, an ugly rumor beyond the garden wall. Poor Mama, Papa, they meant only the best for me. They kept me like a porcelain vase, small and treasured to themselves in our ant world. Our beehive rooms, our microscopic library, our land of the magnificent size of my parents' psychosis. They must have dreamed they would live forever, keeping me like a butterfly under glass. But first Father died, and then fire ate up the little house, the wasp's nest, and every postage-stamp mirror and salt-cellar closet within. Mama, too, gone. And myself alone, watching the fallen embers tossed out into a world of monsters and titans, caught in a landslide of reality, rushed, rolled, and smashed to the bottom of the cliff. It took me a year to adjust. A job with a sideshow was unthinkable. There seemed no place for me in the world. And then, a month ago, the persecutor came into my life, clapped a bonnet on my unsuspecting head, and cried to his friends, "I want you to meet the little woman." Amy stopped reading. Her eyes were unsteady, and the magazine shook as she handed it to Ralph. "You finish it. The rest is a murder story. It's all right, but don't you see that little man? That little man?" Ralph tossed the magazine aside and lit a cigarette lazily. I like westerns better. Ralph, you've got to read it. He needs someone to tell him how good he is and keep him writing. Ralph looked at her, his head to one side. And guess who's gonna do it? Well, well, ain't we just the Savior's right hand? I won't listen. Use your head, damn it! You go busting in on him and he'll think you're handing him pity. He'll chase you screaming out of his room. She sat down, thinking about it slowly, trying to turn it over and see it from every side. I don't know, maybe you're right. Oh, it's not just pity, Ralph, honest. But maybe it'd look like it to him. I've got to be awful careful. She shook her shoulders back and forth, pinching softly with her fingers. Hell, lay off him is all I... Oh, he shook his shoulders back and forth, pinching softly with his fingers. Hell, lay off him is all I ask. You'll get nothing but trouble for your dough. God, Amy, I never seen you so hepped on anything. Look, you and me, let's make it a day. Take a lunch, get us some gas, and just drive on the coast as far as we can drive. Swim, have supper, see a good show in some little town. To hell with this carnival. How about it? A damn nice day and no worries. I've been saving a couple of bucks. It's because I know he's different, she said, looking off into darkness. It's because he's something we can never be. You and me and all the rest of us here on the pier. It's so funny, so funny. Life fixed him so he's good for nothing but carny shows, but there he is on the land. And life made us so we wouldn't have to work in the carny shows, but here we are anyway, way out here at the sea on the pier. Sometimes it seems like 1,000,000 miles to the shore. How come, Ralph, that we got the bodies, but he got the brains and can think things we'll never even guess? You haven't even been listening to me, said Ralph. She sat with him, standing over her, his voice far away. Her eyes were half shut and her hands were in her lap, twitching. I don't like that shrewd look you're getting on, he said finally. She opened her purse slowly and took out a small roll of bills and started counting. $35, $40, there. I'm going to phone Billy Fine and have him send out one of those tall-top mirrors to Mr. Bigelow at the Ganges Arms. Yes, I am. What? Think of how wonderful for him, Ralph, having one in his own room any time he wants it. Can I use your phone? Go ahead. Be nutty. Ralph turned quickly and walked off down the tunnel. A door slammed. Amy waited, then after a while put her hands to the phone and began to dial. With painful slowness, she paused between numbers, holding her breath, shutting her eyes, thinking how it might seem to be small in the world, and then one day someone sends a special mirror by, a mirror for your room where you can hide away with the big reflection of yourself, shining and write stories never going out into the world unless you had to. How might it be then, alone with the wonderful illusion, all in one piece in the room? Would it make you happy or sad? Would it help your writing or hurt it? She shook her head back and forth. At least this way, there would be no one to look down at you. Night after night, perhaps, rising secretly at 3 in the cold morning, you could wink and dance around and smile and wave at yourself, so tall, so very fine. In the bright-looking glass, a telephone voice said, "Billy Fines." "Oh, Billy!" she cried.